Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 10 of the Progressive Democrats of Howard County podcast. We've got a very special one for you all, but before we get into the details, hope everybody's been well. It has been a little bit since our last podcast episode, but we've been busy, been doing a lot of different things, but we're glad to be back. Hiruy, how things been on your end?
Hey, Jake. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this episode. And as Jake mentioned, we do have a very important episode. I would say every single one of our episodes are very important, but this one, these series of episodes are probably the most important that we've done so far. So thank you all for joining us. Jake?
Yeah, I think this might be the first time that we've actually interviewed candidates on the podcast, if my memory serves. And as Hiruy kind of foreshadowed a little bit, we are doing a series of interviews on the HoCo4Us Slate, running for Democratic Central Committee, which both Hiruy and myself are a part of. And we just wanted to talk to each slate member, give the public and the voters a chance to hear a little bit about each member of the slate. So there are 17 members of the HoCo4Us Slate. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be interviewing each of them. And so we are very happy to kick off this new series with one of our members of our slate, Taneeka Richardson. Taneeka, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Jake. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on. Thank you for running with us. So I guess just to start off, how about you introduce yourself to the world, to the county, tell a little bit about yourself for, people who aren't familiar.
Sure. So for folks who don't know, my name is Taneeka, and I am a Howard County resident. I've lived here since 2005. I relocated here from Baltimore City. Actually by chance, using a housing choice voucher, I was able to kind of relocate here, kind of give my family a second start, better start, for better lack of words. And we've been here ever since. So this is kind of like my second home. This is like Howard County, as all my kids know. I'm a mom of 5. I have 2 OM graduates as we speak. And I have an 8th grader at Wild Lake, and a 4th grader at Thunderhill, and a 2-year-old. So she's not in school yet, so we'll see where she ends up. But yeah, I've been here, been pretty active in a lot of different things around Howard County, mainly around housing. I normally get kind of pulled in for kind of my advice and different recommendations just based off of my experience and just, my lived experience with being a voucher recipient. So I got experience with that, but I love all policy areas though.
Yeah.
So, Taneeka, looking at your resume and a set of accomplishments, you definitely have an impressive resume. And we're definitely, I'm definitely glad to be running with you on this slate. And you alluded to some of your experience in the county. Can you talk about some recent experiences in terms of activism that would let the voter know more about what you're interested in and what you think is important to address?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. So I'm fortunate enough that at my day job, I'm a policy analyst and my 9 to 5 for a nonprofit. So my boss is really cool and progressive, so to speak, and kind of let us just kind of come up with our own research ideas. So things I'm really passionate about really is, I know it sounds cliche, but I'm really obviously big into equity as a minority, as an African-American woman. I'm really big into equity, whether that's with housing, employment, transportation, the criminal justice system, all those things kind of are important to me as a mom, and most importantly, as a mom of 4 African-American sons. So I'm always kind of looking at all different areas. Most recently in Howard County, though, I was asked to be on the Howard County Racial Equity Task Force. So that was, enlightening and a good experience to kind of come together with other Howard County residents and kind of come up with recommendations for the county council. I was also on like the Attorney General's COVID task force, and that was more like a statewide thing. But of course, I'm always, looking at how state policy can translate to local policy and what that means here for Howard County. And then, as you guys know, I was with you guys with the SROs, trying to figure out, how we can, still, keep our children safe at school and still make it a safe place for learning as well. So those are like 3 of the most recent things I've kind of been doing with COVID. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting everybody know about, you're a busy woman doing a lot of different things, and now candidate on top of that. Yeah, I mean, I think I had worked with you, how we first met was through the Police Accountability Task Force, and then, was happy to see, months later, your name come up again on the Racial Equity Task Force. And so I'm not sure which subcommittee you served on with the Racial Equity Task Force, but I'm curious, equity, I think, is obviously an incredibly important thing. It's something, sort of central to the HoCo4Us Slate that we're running on. But, how do you feel about sort of, do you ever feel like equity gets talked about a lot in rhetoric, but, there's sort of a lack of action behind it? And maybe what do you think that the Democratic Party could do better to actually bring equity?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jake, and thank you for that question. So I was on the Housing Committee, right, by default. But so just a little quick background, like obviously I grew up from Baltimore City, right? I was born and raised. That's literally where all my family is. I don't have any family, here. I just kind of built my own relationship. So moving from Baltimore City to here, that was in itself kind of like a culture shock and a huge change, because I was moving away as a single mom with no support system out here. However, when I came out here, coming from that type of environment, because we all know the city has its problems, but I was just like, it was like a culture shock to me. I was like, wow, this county is so great. I remember my boys going to school and they was like, I remember the first time they brought home textbooks. I was like, what the heck? They got textbooks out here? Like, we didn't have textbooks, we just had Xerox copies and stuff. So it's like, I was kind of like in this bubble of like, oh, it's so great, it's so perfect, we don't have any problems, everything is so fine. And then like as I started going to college, and actually my move out here, because initially, let me tell you that story, I initially was going to school for nursing. That was my trade. Like most of the women in my family are nurses, or the men went into the military, right? That's what my family does. But just moving and seeing the differences, it kind of got me interested in public health, which is how I ended up changing my major to public health. So it was through those classes, and I remember talking to someone, and I was like, well, we got the #1 school system, like Howard County is the bomb, that's it, we're the best. And it just was like, and they had me thinking, it was like, well, it's the best for who, right? So it had me thinking like, what do they mean, like the best for who, right? And it's just kind of like, once you start looking at the data, and you start breaking down like, okay, yeah, we might have the #1 school system, we might have all these different resources, about who's actually taking advantage of these resources, right? Who's able to take these AP classes, who's able to do all these things to kind of set them on a path towards college, or a better, for a better economic future. So once I started looking at all of that, I was like, okay, I see the disparities here, right? And that's just with the education piece. Within 5 years of living in Howard County, I definitely noticed that all the affordable housing is concentrated in certain villages. So it was kind of like me riding through Longreach for village, for example, and I just was like, if this was Baltimore City, this would definitely be a food desert, right? Because they didn't have like a supermarket for, they don't think, they still don't have a supermarket. But when I first, they didn't have a market for like the longest time, right? And I know like a lot of public housing is there. So like, it's just like stuff that I was noticing, that I noticed that kind of wasn't fair, and it just didn't make sense to me, like why. And it was kind of resembling kind of like the segregation that we see in the city a little bit, with kind of how certain communities are kind of clustered together. And I could see the comparison even in Howard County, kind of similar to what I came from, which is how I kind of started advocating around different policies for housing in Howard County.
So, Taneeka, as you were talking, I started thinking about this question here, and this is I think this leads to the impetus of why we're doing this. As you know, I think for the most part, Howard County has been governed by some form of a Democratic majority, one way or another, for a few years, at least a couple of decades. Mm-hmm. And there are people who would say that things things are going fine, and we're working toward equity, and we're improving things. I'm not one of those people. I think that that's why I'm running, in that we need to because of this the segregation that you speak of, that's been segregated communities. So to that question, or to the notion that given who's been given what's been going on in terms of who's been governing and how that has happened, what has happened as a result of that, would you agree to the notion that the party in its current form is making progress toward equity and desegregating communities and improving providing equitable allocation of resources?
My honest answer would be no. I don't see that on the surface, just on a number of different fronts. I mean, just for example, like I live, granted now they finally are rebuilding our school, but I lived in Oakland Mills Village for a number of years, right? And I know for a fact that Oakland Mills Village, as far as funding for our schools, like we were kind of at the bottom thread, right? So I definitely don't see it. Now, I mean, I ride around and I see all the development taking place. I see that, right? I see the congestion. I see back roads that I used to take that were back roads that are no longer back roads because the traffic and stuff is super crowded, right? But even with the stuff that is being built, it's still not affordable. You know what I mean? So for example, take me, for example, who I would think I'm successful, like I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to school, I got my GED, I got 2 degrees. I've lived here for like 16, 17 years, and yet I want to buy a home, and I may possibly have to look outside of the district, right? Because it's just so expensive here. It's nothing really affordable here. It's not too many homeownership programs here that really do help. And the one that is here, we don't have enough time to talk about that in the interview, but that program has its own faults as well. That was something that we talked about on a task force, and they're trying to kind of redo that to make that better. But it's just really sad because I hear stories all the time about teachers who work here who can't afford to buy here. So it's just like we're building up $1 and $2 million homes, and I'm like, who's going to be able to afford that? You know what I mean? So it's just yeah. A lot more can definitely be done to spread equity for everyone, especially for people who have actually lived here and called it home. As I would like to say, development without displacement, right? So.
Absolutely. And, thank you for, sharing your experience, your story with us. And, I think it is such a shame that, so many people who aren't from Howard County originally hear about its, good reputation. They work really hard, save up a lot of money to finally move to, try to give their family, better resources, better place to grow up. And then, after they've spent all that money, it's so expensive to live here, they realize like, oh, things aren't as equitable as they seem from the outside. And, now I'm already here and I paid for all this, but I'm not getting the results that the reputation would lead me to expect. So thank you for that, Taneeka. Unfortunately, as we said, these are going to be short interviews. So I don't think we have time for any more questions from Taneeka, but thank you, Taneeka. Definitely everybody check her out on social media. Again, HoCo4Us number 4, HoCo4Us.com. She's running on the slate. You can donate there. And with no further ado, we want to transition to part 2 of episode 10 of the Progressive Democrats of Howard County podcast. And that is to interview another HoCo4Us Slate member, Drew Roth, fellow Elkridgeonian. How you doing today, Drew? Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, Jake. I'm doing good. And are we Elkridgeonians? What do they call people?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I just invented it. That's what we're called now, Elkridgeonians.
Okay, I'll go. It works for me.
Yeah, if you think of a better one, let me know. But yeah, so I guess I'll start with same question of, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background for those who aren't familiar.
Well, I'm a retired federal employee living here in Elkridge, and I'm an engineer by trade, and I spent my career as a federal employee doing hands-on engineering. I've lived here in Elkridge for 15 years and moved here from Baltimore City, where I lived in a row house in the Fells Point, Canton area for nearly 20 years, for 19 years. And as soon as we moved to Elkridge, I started becoming more and more involved in community organizations and various community projects. The first one I started with was working with the Greater Elkridge Community Association, fighting a proposed intermodal freight yard on Race Road in Elkridge that would have put a massive number of freight trains and truck traffic within a quarter mile of 300 homes. So we fought that and got it to go away. So that was the first accomplishment there, and that involved coordinating with our county, state, and federal representatives, all of whom CSX had got to agree to provide subsidies for this atrocious project that would have wrecked the quality of lives for many, many people nearby. So that kind of was like the first message that, has kind of led me to where we are with HoCo4Us, that we need to get the county government working for its residents and not, and we have a problem now that doesn't happen. Our county government tends to work for campaign contributors, particularly the building industry and developers, whose interests are contrary to those of us residents. Another big issue that we worked on hard, I later became the president of GECA, and this was one of the main things we worked on, was the lack of school capacity in Elkridge. As Taneeka mentioned earlier, roads that used to be country roads are not country roads anymore, and there's been a lot of new development. Well, and in Elkridge, a lot of that new development didn't come with schools, and we still don't have a high school. When I moved here, it was shortly before my son was born, and we thought, well, we're moving to Howard County. Elementary school and middle school are right up the road. They're decent. This looks great. High school is, pretty far away and severely overcrowded, but with all the development going on here, by the time our kids in high school, there'll be a new school built. That won't be a problem. Ha, 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 you fooled me. Still no high school. And my son's a sophomore. So, and the reason there's no high school is high schools are developer amenities. Schools are cited because they make new development more profitable. For High School 13, which is ostensibly to reduce the overcrowding in Elkridge, it is cited where it is because it is next to a future town center by the family who developed Conterra in Prince George's County, and who contributed heavily to both Alan Kittleman and Courtney Watson when they were running for county executive to make sure that the next high school was next to their development on land that they would sell to the county. And right there, all of that is, in a nutshell, everything that's wrong with the county government. They were not making a decision based on what is in the interest of families and students at all. They were making a decision of what made the most campaign contributions for themselves and what would maximize profits for the developer. And where the kids go to school was not a consideration. So that's
So Drew, it's really good to be running on the slate with you. I think, you know, one thing I consider, I've always mentioned this, you know, when it comes to county issues, the most, 90% of the 90% of the things that affect us on a daily basis are related to zoning and land use decisions. And because of that, your knowledge on these issues, I think are invaluable, because for the most part, in the central committee, I don't believe there's any focus on that other than if a central committee member wants to join a project, we'll just call it maybe the Rouse project or something, unless central committee member wants to join the Rouse project, as a board member to help take over some valuable land for Howard Hughes. That's to the extent a central committee member has been involved in zoning and land use in the past. So having said that, I think, looking at the next 4 or 5, I want to say in the short term, maybe 4 or 5 years, but in the long term, decades, we're coming up with HoCo by design. What do you think, should voters be aware of, at least, 1 or 2 things voters should be aware of, and why do you think, a central committee member could have an impact, if at all, on those issues?
Well, HoCo by design is hugely important. And one of the things that is really, really important about HoCo by design is it calls for an enormous amount of new development and says not one word about where the schools will be located or when they will be built to provide seats for the students in that new development. Not one word. And schools are a critical land use in Howard County, but our plan for land use for the next 10 years is silent on schools. That's incredibly bad and incredibly wrong. When HoCo by design was first released, voting on it was delayed until after the election. That tells me that the county government did not have the votes to get HoCo by design through the county council. And then HoCo by design went back for another round of public meetings and a bunch of rewriting. And I've read the chapters that have been released with the new rewriting. And what's important is all of the negative feedback that was provided to the first part of HoCo by design did not change the content of what they want to do in HoCo by design. What they did is they changed the words that describe what they want to do. They didn't change what they're going to do. Still no mention of schools, still new dense development all over the place, and trying to open the door to weaken the APFO laws. So this next election is absolutely critical, because HoCo design is just a plan. It has to get implemented with changes to the zoning regulations and changes to the development rules, and those changes have to pass the county council. Right now, the county council has 2 reliable votes that are independent of developer influence, Liz Walsh and Deb Young. It is absolutely critical that in this election, we get 3 members of the county council who will be independent of developer influence. And as it happens, Liz Walsh, Deb Young, and the woman running in the 5th district, who I've met and I can't remember her name. Help me out, guys.
Joan Pontius.
Joan Pontius.
JoanPontius.com. Yes.
Have all taken the no developer funding, no dark money pledge. And I trust them that when it comes time to vote for regulations to implement Howard County by design, they will do the right thing and support development rules under this plan that actually do the happy words that the plan says, to protect the character of our communities and to make sure that government works for everyone throughout the county so that we all receive a fair and equitable share of capital investment and amenities, whether there is new development or existing neighborhoods.
Well, thank you for that, Drew. And you touched on, a lot of different things there, and a big, theme of our HoCo4Us Slate. And, you mentioned the no developer donation campaign pledge. Our HoCo4Us Slate collectively all signed on to that recently. But one thing that I've heard you say, as long as I've known you, and you've touched on it a little bit, is quote unquote, I am not on team developer. And you support those who are not on team developer. So could you explain, unpack that a little bit and explain, I guess, for people who don't, might not be aware on this issue, like why should people be concerned about developer influence in politics and party, and how is developer interest different or even contradictory from the interests of the community at large?
Well, I think a really great example of this is that, the development community is deep into a lot of county processes, whether it be school redistricting. Redistricting is done to put new development in the schools the developer wants them in, to the capital budget, where what we find is the capital budget for improvements and amenities is targeted towards places where new development is taking place, and very little is spent on established communities. So, as somebody living in Elkridge, and I'll use one of my favorite, I'm an avid bicycle rider. There's no bike infrastructure in Elkridge, but the county government spends $1 million a year to put separated bike lanes in downtown Columbia to benefit Howard Hughes. Now, this is crazy. Am I paying taxes as an Elkridge resident to build amenities for Howard Hughes? Why can't we have some amenities in the Route 40 corridor and the Route 1 corridor? This needs to get untangled. And what you see is because there's so much money to be made and more profits to be made in development. When you have members of the council who are independent of developers, the developers will find somebody to run against them and back them heavily and put giant billboards up and down Route 1 and Route 40 faces on it, right? And as for example, Naveen Khartoum running against Liz Walsh. And the thing that's crazy about this is Naveen is running for the 1st district, which is Elkridge and Ellicott City, but she's getting thousands and thousands of contributions from Howard Hughes Corporation, the developer of downtown Columbia. Now, why do we think that Howard Hughes Corporation has an interest in the well-being of the 1st district? They don't. They want to continue the practice of all of the capital investment of the county not being spread about the county fairly, but being concentrated where they are. And so they're buying a candidate allegedly to represent us in the 1st district, who I don't believe for 1 minute is going to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute. Why isn't there any money for amenities in Elkridge and Ellicott City? Why is it all being spent in, where it benefits Howard Hughes Corporation? Not when she's getting thousands of dollars from Howard Hughes Corporation. So this is really key. I mean, I can see where people, in the districts where Howard Hughes Corporation operates would have a shared interest with Howard Hughes and might be interested in supporting a candidate they support, but I can't imagine why anyone in the 1st district would vote for a candidate backed by a huge business who, has publicly stated, we make a lot of money because we control the Howard County government on their investor documentation. So this is why it's really important when it comes time to vote, look for that no developer money, no dark money pledge, because that means that those candidates are going to be working for the average Howard County resident and in our interest, because it's HoCo for us. Sorry,
Drew, you're getting me worked up here because these are really really important issues that you have discussed, and I think people really need to pay attention, as you have impressed upon, I think, the audience the importance of the next general plan. And as we close our second part of this candidate series, I think I don't remember any central committee candidates who have delved into these important county issues the way that the first two central committee candidates in HoCo4Us Slate have, as you and Taneeka. So I think this will be very good, and we look forward to interviewing the rest of the slate. So thank you for agreeing to interview with us, and to our audience, look out for more episodes of interviews with the candidates. So thanks again, Drew. Jake, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Hiruy pretty much said it all. We'll see everybody for episode 11, where we'll be interviewing, more candidates from the HoCo4Us Slate. And the last thing I want to end on is, Drew mentioned Joan Pontius running against the only Republican on our county council in District 5. And she just had her campaign launch last weekend, and not a single member of the current Central Committee was there or has really done anything to support her, help her meet the Citizens Election Fund qualification deadline, which is on June 4th. So, everything that Drew and Taneeka said and more, this is why HoCo4Us is running. So please, if you liked what any of us had to say, check our slate out, HoCo4Us.com, number 4, HoCo4Us.com. Consider donating if you want to support progressive Democrats of Howard County. HoCoProgressives.com. Sign up for our email list, become a dues paying member, et cetera, et cetera. Other than that, thank you, everybody. See you for episode 11.